Toxicity and violence are sometimes used interchangeably. They are inherently different concepts. Language and violence are opposites. They are also mutually influential. Language is understood as a medium for violence. Discourse is not just talk, but it influences the practices, habits, and culture that a certain society has. Discord thus can be used to legitimize power relations, to instigate violence, and to naturalize domination. This form of violence is known as symbolic violence. Hate speech is thus a type of discourse that contains explicit violence against others. Incivility may also encompass hate speech in some instances. Toxicity is not the same as hate speech, incivility, or symbolic violence. Toxicity is a dimension particular to discourses that spread and in this spread can potentialize the violence they generate. Toxicity thus has an effect on the community either by silencing opposite discourses or by legitimizing the violence through the spread of the idea. Platforms driven by their economic logic make up the fundamental context in which toxicity emerges, as it allows discursive violence to be quickly spread and legitimized. Toxicity represents the degree to which a particular discourse can spread and negatively influence other decisions. Keep this little quote here in mind when we go through the video, as it is of vital importance for the topic at hand. And we will go over the origin, history, impact, and evolution of the most overused buzzword within the gaming industry and the wider online sphere.
Toxicity.
First of all, a big disclaimer. This is mostly about toxicity in the gaming space. I will do a little detour later on in the video and talk about the social media aspect, a little bit to differentiate the topics. But mainly I will focus on the term within the gaming sphere, but due to the actions of gaming outlets, journalists, activists, and the gaming companies themselves, both gaming spaces and social media have been blended together over the years, so the comparison is unfortunately unavoidable. First, let's start off with looking at some basic definitions, even though we have already heard one very in-depth, though very disagreeable description of toxicity. But let's see what's available without finding a specific study on the phenomena first.
Shut the fuck up in the background! You backstage game in trouble! Shut your fucking mouth!
Toxic. The original term comes from a 1660s definition derived from the French word toxique and or directly from the late Latin toxicus as in poisoned or toxicum as in poison, and from Greek toxikon specifically for the use on arrows. And then there's a possible earlier source in Iranian taxa, which suggests possibly a pre-Greek origin. Then we have toxicity from the same source. Now this source just links to toxic again and suggests both kind of mean the same. It does not consider the word being properly used as a disambiguation to describe negative behavior. So already, going by the first source, we see that some definitions don't even consider the term appropriate to describe social behavior. Let's see what good old Wikipedia thinks though. Disclaimer, never use Wikipedia as your only or primary source. Okay? Now Wikipedia labels toxicity as toxicity is a degree to which a chemical substance or a particular mixture of substances can damage an organism. It hints at the same Greek origin for poisonous arrows. It then goes on and describes the 5 types of toxicity in biology and chemistry. There is also a hint at behavioral toxicity, but that type refers to side effects due to heavy medication, usually clinically prescribed. So no mention of toxic behavior in the main article on Wikipedia either. Then Cambridge Dictionary does indeed have the first hint at toxic and toxicity having maybe a deeper social meaning attached to it. Toxic adjectives: unpleasant, toxic parents, a toxic relationship, their marriage turned toxic after a few years. And amusingly, there's even a use for the term toxic within financial investments. Of investments, debts, etc. very difficult to sell or pay back. The money went into high risk and often toxic investments. So even on the stock markets there is toxicity. Toxic behavior has also been studied in various various settings, including the workplace, where it manifests as actions like verbal abuse, sabotage, and undermining colleagues, creating a hostile environment that harms morale, productivity, and organizational health, and was firstly mentioned in self-help books that specifically target workplace toxicity. We can already see that toxic and toxicity has a very broad and nebulous application to anything that might be labeled as a negative, and the dictionary definitions even use very different examples to quantify what toxic even means within social behavior. Finally, we find what we search for in the disambiguation area on Wikipedia. This disambiguation talks about the social science aspect of the word, listing the following: toxic femininity, toxic flattery, toxic leader, toxic masculinity, toxic positivity, toxic workplace, and then toxicity, a gamer slang term used for poor player behavior. And finally, there we have it. Toxicity, quote, slang for the actions of a rude and unwelcoming gamer or gaming community that detriments the experience for other players or developers. Almost universally viewed negatively across gaming. Some game developers take measures to stymie toxicity in their games. Yet, we have another, but surely not the last definition of toxicity, and believe me, oh god, believe me, we will see so many different definitions throughout this video because no one can decide what toxicity even actually means. 2018, by the way, was apparently such a toxic year that the word became the Oxford word of 2018 as seen in this article. Apparently in 2018 the word usage exploded by about 45%, which is interesting because, as we will learn, the mainstreaming of the term within the gaming sphere happened way earlier. Likely the rise in usage was due to toxic being used as a broad term to describe anything disruptive, undesirable, and unlikable on social media and in general online spaces, not just the video games. In this article, we even get a little bit of a historical insight how toxic shifted from a very literal and chemical definition to first an environmental and then to a very metaphorical description. The article also has a very interesting quote on how toxicity has become a buzzword. We have embraced the word as a kind of blanket descriptor for anything deeply but often invisibly harmful. Could this be another description for toxicity? The reason why toxic was chosen in particular comes down to the way toxic differentiates itself as alien and invasive and much more impactful as just poisonous, for example. So that's why the specific word has been fallen into the trap of being abused as a buzzword. Oh, and would you also look at that? 2018 is also the year where gaslighting and incel made it on the list. Coincidence? I think not.
Your life is nothing. You serve zero purpose. You should kill yourself now.
Early gaming marketing invented and encouraged what is now known as toxicity. Well, they partially encouraged it. I don't think early marketing is wholly responsible for all the toxicity we see today. Xbox circa 2019. A little trash talk is an expected part of competitive multiplayer action, and that's not a bad thing. But hate has no place here. And what's not okay is when that trash talk turns into harassment. Also Xbox 2002. He wanted to meet me, so he could see the face of failure. Does ruining someone's day make you do the dance of joy? Also Xbox circa 2002.
You stink, Dark Master. My grandma drives faster than you.
You're mine, Oil Slick.
We are gonna so beat you!
That dude's a jerk.
I heard that you are so going down.
Grass, press the mute button.
No, that mutes everybody. I got a better idea. Let's mute that oil spew instead. Hey, Dirk, can you tell your audience what I'm gonna do?
What Oil Slick doesn't know is that we're using the handy player mute button, available only on Xbox Live, to shut him up.
You guys are so pathetic. You chaff my...
Gotta love that feature. And that's the race. Check this out. I can invite him while he's playing another game. All right, now watch as I send him a game invite. There it is. He checks out his friends list, see who's sending him a friendly challenge.
Sweet. Invite from Dark Loser. It's like candy from a baby.
Funny how the toxic player here is depicted as a girl, and believe me, that's weirdly not a one-time occurrence in these early presentations. How about Sony, also circa 2002? There's PlayStation's online functionality in Twisted Metal Black. Reach out and smoke someone. Or John Romero's about to make you his bitch. Daikatana ad 1998. Or a 1999 print ad for the NFL 2K on the Sega Dreamcast. It knows you like running off tackle on 3rd and short. Obstinate little tool, aren't you? Or Or a Sonic Adventure ad. Sonic has a new light speed dash. Too bad, your lame ass reflexes are the same. Or maybe this Sonic Heroes ad. Anybody up for us? What? Sega, you can't just play into the stereotype of Sonic fans like that, and so early on too. Holy Jesus, no wonder Sonic fans turned out to be like that. Holy shit. Sega, by the way, with their Dreamcast advertisements, were the absolute forerunners of the edgy game marketing. Let's take a look at some of these edge kino-based red pill examples. I used to take out my bullets, and on each one I would write the name of each person on my bus. Then a friend showed me I could purge my violent urges in Netfighter on heat.net against other people. Thanks to Heat, the people on my bus will never know how close they truly came. Don't suppress your aggression. Instead, focus your urges onto the net. Divert humankind's inert violent urges and divert them into the cyberspace. How Heat can create a peaceful reality through a violent cyberspace. Futile attempts to deny the killer inside. The answer is to not stop killing, but to change the way we kill by taking it to the net. Log into heat.net and join the millions of human beings united by aggression. Or how about using Fred Durst as promotional imagery? And who could forget about the epic rant of Captain Carnage? I stuck a cat in your rocket, you back-ass Tuscaloosa cracker. He's in there, chewing your mice. But you probably eat mice yourself when you run out of possum, you monster trucker-loving buck-toothed hillbilly. And you other two mentally challenged dopes, hang up, I won. I'm in the mood. Funny that in this example, the captain seems to be a woman behind the screen. Once again, what did Sega mean by this? You think just gaming companies were into the trend, by the way? Well, how about this 1999 ad for a 3DFX graphics card? There are two kinds of gamers in this world. The ones who still play on consoles and the ones who've actually seen breasts. In short, early gaming company marketing is edgy, encouraging the toxic behavior we know today. Reasons for this being early competitive shooters and the intense player attitudes that come from an extremely competitive environment. Another early instigator of toxicity were hardcore loyalty to the console wars paired with the godlike superiority of the PC master race, which is not an exaggeration at all. PC superiority is based in facts and logic. Additionally, toxicity was encouraged due to the early gaming magazines also catering to the dominant gaming audience at the time. Men. Or, sorry, as the article states, fragile masculinity. The boys-only mentality, the booth babes, and dates with Lara Croft all are contributors to the state of gaming today. Oh no, oh god no, the horror of conventionally attractive human biological females, oh god no. Weird though that in two prominent examples of marketing, the women were shown to be the primarily toxic ones and the instigators, as very strange indeed. Nowadays, all of these companies pretend to be innocent little angels. Well, unless you look behind the curtains like with the Riot games and Blizzard, then it doesn't look that innocent anymore. Let's hope that Xbox Games and Sega doesn't have any breast milk stealing co-workers. Toxicity in gaming also goes all the way back to apparently the era of arcade gaming. Yep, remember when you trash-talked your buddies in the arcade? Does anybody even remember that? Are there people watching this video that went to an arcade? Anyway, you were toxic when you did that in the arcade. Didn't you know that? Early online gaming with lesser restrictions gave way to anonymous toxicity and hate speech, mostly triggered due to competitive environments. Ironically, initiatives that combat toxicity such as Positive Play and the Good Game Well Played initiative, these carry names that would now count as toxic behavior if you said it after a game to the enemy team. Funny how that works out. So that's some info on the early possible origins of the word, but we forget something, or rather, someone. The person who would go on to mainstream the word and have long-lasting ramifications on the gaming space. Riot Lyte.
You're fucking stupid! Fucking retarded!
A bit of food for thought before we get into the meat of things. Think about the following question. Who is the most toxic player within a team? In what way? What does that even mean? Is that someone who is just bad and has an overwhelmingly bad impact on player performance or team performance? How would that work out? Is it just negative behavior, or is it specific gameplay behavior that is considered unsportsmanlike? What does the label toxic player actually mean when people apply it? And more importantly, who applies the label and who decides what that label actually means? To kick the whole Riot Lyte segment off, let's first look at Riot Lyte's definition of toxicity. Yep, you guessed it, we got another toxicity definition. The reason we use the word toxic is very intentional in our observations and research on the player behavior, and we find that a single source of negative behavior can ripple through hundreds or thousands of games. For example, let's say we have a game with 10 players, 9 are positive and 1 is negative, but that one negative player is racist, rages all game and intentionally leaves the game. This experience can negatively influence the other 9 positive players in the game. Some of the 9 players will play other games of League of Legends, and instead of being positive, they might start the game neutral or negative. Their actions can also influence 9 other players in that game, and then the toxicity spreads. This is yet another definition of gaming toxicity, specifically this time. And to be honest, in my opinion, it is an apt description of what toxicity is as a concept. There is nothing wrong with this definition. In fact, the spreading aspect of negativity is a pretty good stigmatization of this phenomena. Keep in mind, toxicity as defined in gaming isn't just about negative behavior, as we learned. The transmission, the viral spreading, is a key component to all forms of toxicity. Without that component, it is arguable the term doesn't even correctly apply. One note on the Tribunal, because it's gonna come up. The Tribunal was initially launched in early 2011, which was actually before Riot Lyte joined Riot Games in early 2012. Toxicity in League has gotten so bad that in recent years players wanted the Tribunal back. The broken system Riot correctly and rightfully abandoned. Yes, people want that system back in the game. So first, why is League so toxic to begin with? Why is it so toxic that it needed Riot Lyte's intervention? Well, here's a few examples. Not all of them, but just a few. There's really no carry in a 5-man team. Therefore, no win, no carry by just one person. The 60% win rates are considered extremely high. That means 40% of games are always losses. Early snowballing, as of many years ago by this time, is a problem. No idea if snowballing still is an issue today. Single mistakes can lose the game due to that early snowballing. Then there are massive egos within the game. I think that is mostly a general gaming issue. Then there's champion prejudice, like female support types with specific names leading to targeted harassment. Then there are hating on different mains, inconsistent moderations, for example slurs to end up getting punished, but silent toxicity does not, for example feeding, win trading or intentional match sabotage. So what's the difference between inting and having a genuinely bad day? There are petty reasons to report players, to make it additionally difficult to effectively moderate. And it's truly and honestly ever only about winning. Losses mean that these contribute to toxicity, especially when they happen repeatedly. That is just a very short list. I'm sure you can add more to it and expand it to many other online video games. Now Riot Lyte comes into the picture in early 2012. He got his master's degree in cognitive psychology in 2009 and later a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, with a focus on visual perception and behavior in 2012, both at the University of Washington. He published scientific papers such as Capture of Attention to Threatening Stimuli Without Perceptual Awareness, published in the National Center of Biotechnology Information, and a paper entitled Enhanced Memory for Sciences Presented at Behaviorally Relevant Points in Time, published in the Public Library of Science. He joined Riot Games as stated in early 2012 after the Tribunal was introduced. Lyte's primary tenets were better humans make better players. His biggest breakout contribution to the mainstreaming of the word toxicity has to absolutely be his Games Developer Conference speech in 2013, and then many of the following interviews he gave. So it makes sense that we first look at his ideas and his ideals as they were presented in the GDC speech.
Fat and obese. You know what fat means? You know what obese means?
Shaping Behavior in Online Games is the title of the GDC presentation. The initial opinion on how to manage toxicity was primarily always, firstly, deal with it, ban the players. Toxicity is normal in online games. But that was before Riot Lyte joined. Lyte then presents examples of what is or could be considered toxic behavior. Now you tell me if what you think these examples are, if they're particularly egregious, if they are ban-worthy or not. My personal opinion is they're rather witty banter between players, but nothing to get mad at. Would you get mad at this if you saw that in a game? Be honest about it. Bad behavior in games is one of the primary reasons why players leave League of Legends permanently. Now my question would be immediately, how many people? How often does that happen? Is it actually that big of an issue? Is it just the insults? Or do players refer to something else when they leave the game over quote-unquote toxicity? Then their behavior team grew massively since 2012 when Lyte joined the company, and remember, this was the instigating event that popularized the term, so you can bet that these kinds of departments exist in almost every gaming company now, and they are also likely as far-reaching as those that Riot employs. In Lyte's example, their team reached up and into the marketing team. Riot then created player behavior profiles of every player in League, whether you wanted it or not. Therefore, profiling every single player and labeling them according to their behavioral habits. Then there is a toxic versus normal player behavior definition. As Riot defines it, a normal player, keep this in mind, a normal player only has few toxic offenses, is not non-toxic, has a few toxic offenses, less severe and less often. A toxic player has more toxic offenses, more often, and usually more severe, as seen in the graph. So in theory, going by the graph, every player, even the normal, quote-unquote normal, whatever that means, are a little bit toxic every now and then. However, even Lyte admits that IRL happenstance might lead to enraged and negative sentiments in-game, aka having a bad day. But it doesn't matter if you are only toxic once in 100 games due to any real-life issues or so on. You are considered toxic by the system and by other players at that specific moment in that specific game. Their detection system, of course, cannot differentiate between those who instigate on purpose or those who genuinely have a bad day. Due to how toxicity is spread all over the player base, even though quote-unquote normal players are only toxic a few hundred games or so, the sheer volume of players in League means over a certain period of time, in multiple games, you will encounter toxicity on a regular basis. This shows one of the big issues with labeling toxic behavior. What do you label as toxic? When is something toxic? Do you make a cutoff point where something is not fully toxic but still negative behavior? Do you only count some toxic behavior on the graph? No idea. Riot Lyte then lays out a few experiments that define parts of their core community pillars. And one of the prevailing issues with all of these experiments are there are a lot of missing evidence, a lot of things that I would like to see in the presentation, but they are missing probably due to the time constraints at that moment when he presented. These experiments concern themselves partially with the 5 community pillars. Now I will show all 5 pillars of Riot's community trust here, and then go over some of the experiments. We have core pillar number 1, shield players from negative behavior. Core pillar number 2, remove or reform toxic players. 3, create a culture of sportsmanship. 4, reinforce positive behaviors. And 5, create better match chemistry. The experiments conducted on unwilling and unknowing League players, by the way, do concern themselves with only 3 of the pillars due to, again, limited time for the GDC talk. They are about the first 3 pillars to be exact. First, we have the cross-team chat experiment. Can opt-in all chat improve player behavior? This is about the first core pillar, shielding players from negative behavior. The TLDR for this experiment is basically cross-team chat was made optional and turned off by default. A week before the change, 64% of games already had no all chat occurrences, but 81% of these games were negative. Such high number means that they do count minor verbal offenses as toxic behavior. Apparently the 81.7% is made up of at least 1 filed complaints, aka at least a report by a player. Numbers of positive and neutral chats are low, which makes sense if you have such low bars for counting toxic behavior, and that pretty much every game is basically counted as toxic or having at least 1 toxic player. Then we have a week after the change. Now all chat has been made opt-in and disabled by default. 32.7% less negative chat and 34.5% more positive chat. Literally just because you could no longer talk to the enemy team by default. Now I immediately have 2 points to add here, and if you looked at this, you probably are also immediately having to lift your finger and be like, number 1. A lower number makes sense, since less talking to opponents means less shit-talking or psychological warfare. Yeah, that makes sense. But number 2, how do these positives increases correlate with all chat being disabled? There is no connection there. Team chat doesn't become magically more positive just because you can no longer talk to the enemy team. In addition, even with all chat disabled by default, 47% of games had no all chat in use anyway, even before the change. Meaning the rest, keep that in mind, the rest still had cross-team banter enabled, or at least had the opportunity for cross-team banter. My big questions here are, where and how do these number improvements happen, and where do they come from? Did players receive information about the chat being disabled? How did players get more positive even though they are still using the all chat pretty much at the same rate? No explanations or additional information is being shown at the GDC talk. Numbers are just presented as is without proof or effect. Lyte just throws out these statistics without explanation, cause, or any true impact. Given that League of Legends is still considered a toxic game today, it's reasonable to assume these numbers and measures did not have a desirable effect. Even though, looking at the very first experiment alone, this seems like an insane improvement if any of these numbers are actually real. The worst part of the presentation is though, none of the improvements are explained. No reason is given why and how it seemingly happened. We then see more effects of the all chat change. 70% less offensive language reports, 12% less verbal abuse reports, 6% less negative attitude reports, just due to a feature being disabled by default but still being used by more than 50% of the community. It makes no sense, sorry. Then we have the tribunal experiment. This is supposed to enable community engagement to manage their own toxicity. This is about core pillar number 2, remove or reform toxic players. And as you might have expected, it puts responsibility to deal with toxic players on the shoulders of the player base, a method that Riot games would get famous for in the years to come. Tribunal cases are usually made up of logs, builds, team compositions, etc. All are presented to the community where cases get voted on. Players vote on toxic or non-toxic, deciding the fate of a player's account. The biggest issue I see immediately with a system like that is that it encourages snitching. It encourages ratting others out, especially when you get rewards for successful case votings, aka bans and punishments. Lyte then claims 200,000 reformed players, aka those punished by the tribunal who now seemingly, quote-unquote, have bettered themselves, either out of fear from being punished by fellow players or simply by being smart and self-censoring due to the system. The big open questions here are, how many players were correctly and accurately punished? What type and how many punishments were served, and how did the community usually vote on these cases? Once again, none of these effects or impacts of the tribunal are explained, no further information is shown, nothing is proven to actually work, it's apparently just magically making players better human beings. Then there is the feedback loop experiment, still core pillar number 2. Basically, reform cards of the tribunal cases were handed out, they showed punishments, level of agreements, etc. and then those were handed out and sent out to all banned players. Riot Lyte also makes a point that warnings with vague messages before the tribunal was introduced decreased toxicity only quote-unquote a little bit, and bans within that prior system prior to the tribunal always did make players more toxic in every case. Again, there's no real explanation given for these assertions. After the reform cards were being sent out, there were apparently improvements in every category. Even game bans now also apparently lead to less toxicity. Yeah, right. Yeah, of course. Reform cards were online and could be shared, aka they could be used as a public humiliation ritual. Actually, now that I think about it, this being a publicly available card of shame might actually contribute to more toxicity, as now players can be publicly ridiculed to their bans and offensive history, and I don't think that's going to contribute to players bettering themselves in any way, shape or form. Lyte also then posts quote-unquote affirmative responses in the forums supporting the tribunal, the reform cards, and how players deserve their punishment. Once again, Riot encouraging groupthink, obedience to the system, and yes-man behavior, exactly how the Reddit is today. Fully at Riot's beck and call, heavily moderated and censored. This just reads like self-confirming bullshit. Guys, our system totally works. There are a few sheep parroting our opinions. Look at those. Don't look at anywhere else. No. Lyte then also shows evidence of what basically exactly happens in an authoritarian system. Fear of repercussion breeds submissive minds. Players are now begging for their accounts back. They're feigning ignorance. They didn't know what they were saying. They had no idea. They were in an affected state of mind. And also they are promising to get better now. The system treated offenders like criminals, basically, even publicly shamed them with the reform cards. That is a fucked up system and in itself pretty toxic if you think about it. I don't think that contributed to any truly long-lasting betterment of the community. And then we lastly have the Optimus Prime experiments. This one is being talked about the most when you watch videos and articles on the specific subject of Riot Lyte. To explain, priming is a memory effect where exposure to a stimulus can affect later behavior, aka translation, psychologically manipulating players into more desirable behavioral patterns. This is about Riot's third core pillar, creating a culture of sportsmanship. The in-game message feature was used to prime players. It showed good and bad examples of player behavior. Colors were used, for example red, meaning avoid this, white was used as a control color, blue as a positive one, and so on and so forth. The tip location and colors were randomized, and some games didn't get a tip at all. Some tips show players propaganda like, the tribunal improves players who have been punished. In short, it's a mixed method of propagandizing and instilling fear into players. Naturally, these messages seemingly improved player behavior. I mean, of course they did, it's literal propaganda. However, no evidence is provided that it actually had any lasting effects or truly worked out and reformed any. I need to highlight one very specific message within the experiments to show how fucked up Riot games were. This message. Who will be the most sportsman-like player this game? Presented in the color red. This obviously encouraged competition between players. Naturally, this leads to more toxicity, since players are now more likely to compete, lash out in a more, who guessed it, competitive environment. Lyte doesn't even think that making players more toxic through this message was a bad idea, as the spotlighting leads to more player reports. In Lyte's eyes, therefore reducing overall toxicity. But keep in mind, this is instigated. It is instigated toxicity by Riot themselves. How reliable is a system that actively riles up players into reporting each other and then claims to decrease toxicity by number of successfully handed out punishments? Punishments that, in Lyte's opinion, do reform and improve players. And now for the real fucked up shit. Riot brings gender, language, culture and race into play for possibly priming players and further use within the player reform system. Data they harvested from their player base through very intimate and private surveys. Riot Lyte hints at the idea of other scientists and researchers likely being interested in the research data to build further studies on top of the data Riot got from their experiments. In short, the idea of selling this very personal player research data to other institutes, schools and universities. And this is just the beginning of Riot and Lyte's role in shaping how toxicity is being perceived today.
Why am I toxic?
We now go on and continue after the GDC conference through Lyte's further accomplishments within the company and all of his cool features he likely is responsible for, not just in League, but in many other games. While the tribunal was mob justice through voting on player reports enabled by awards, leading to handing out punishments for low impact cases, Lyte also had some fun pastime activities within the community. Riot Lyte publicly embarrassed banned players through online smiting, those responding to the falsely perceived bans, and laid out the reasons why the system banned them. He then publicized their chat logs, their bans, their responses for all to see on Reddit, and so on. These Lyte smites were quite toxic themselves, if you think about it, and very likely did not lead to player betterment. This also showed very early on who Lyte actually was, a man with a superiority complex and a love for holding power over others in a condescending way. Then surveys were sent out for players who had their name altered with some very indecent and personal questions. Some of these were plainly pushing for certain answers and pushing into a certain direction. These survey questions were also partly altered questions from the narcissistic personality inventory and the aggression scale, aka mental experiments on the players trying to gauge their levels of aggression, what's causing it in their private life, their issues, and so on and so forth. It was psychologically invasive information gathering. Riot games always strive to gather more player information in-game, such as age, SCS, religion, sex, social status, family status, and much more. In 2016, Lyte, with the collaboration of Reddit, also popularized popularized the method of shadow banning in an experiment on the League of Legends subreddit, which influenced other platforms who now also use shadow banning as a tactic to punish toxic users. Therefore, Riot Lyte's anti-toxicity measures for gaming spread to social media platforms, which again was one of his goals, as we will see in later interviews we will go over. Very important note here, Riot Lyte is not the primary proprietor of the idea of shadow banning, but he was at least one of the people who pushed for its use and inclusion and helped to mainstream the procedure. Riot Lyte also had a patent published that basically brute forced ads into people's brains no matter what. We also have no idea what the research data that Riot sold might have led to in the long run. What were the effects? What was this data sold to? Chances are that some of the behavioral manipulation tools you see not just in gaming but on social media might be built on parts of Lyte's and Riot's research, whether it's moderation features or the aforementioned advertising features. But we are not done yet. In 2013, Riot had initiated a function to send a notification to players if a player they reported was successfully punished. This is now standard practice among gaming companies, with Overwatch, Destiny and many other games implementing the same feature. The honor system was another Riot Lyte idea. The honor system displayed a positive medal or positive medals on players' accounts and was apparently fairly effective judging by journalists and reports at the time. Never mind that the honor system actually is fully and fundamentally broken, only encouraging positive behavior on the sole basis of getting that medal, aka leading to fake and false positive spurts of behavior that immediately folded into negativity as soon as one of those medals was lost due to a report action on the account. The only thing the honor system promotes is how much you can self-suppress your negativity without actually ever learning anything or truly bettering yourself. The honor band on a profile boils down to a simple quote-unquote, oh, okay, cool. That's the extent of the actual in-game impact the honor system had. Positive reinforcement was severely lacking within that system as well. Unfortunately, players don't just reform themselves when getting a reward for it, and even then it's highly questionable if they truly reformed even when being given the reward. Lyte's system also handed out skins as positive reinforcement to players for not getting banned within a season, which is honestly not really a good idea and not really a good precedent to set if you want to engage and encourage actual positivity. You are in reality awarding players for simply not doing anything or simply dodging game bans for a skin that is also not encouraging player reformation in the long term. The automated system for toxicity detections, then later employed by Riot Games, handed out ranked and chat restrictions. Those were two other Riot Lyte inventions. Ranked restrictions just lead to players being toxic in normal games, and the chat restrictions were a disadvantage for the team that had the restricted player on their team, since they can no longer communicate, thus likely increasing toxicity and leading to more losses. A few other notable examples of Riot's insane attempts to combat toxicity are the reasons players can state when reporting another player in-game. Quote-unquote unskilled is a report function. Apparently that doesn't do anything, but it's likely used to harvest player behavior data. Still, it's an option to report a player, and surely it is most often used if no other realistic reason can be chosen to report someone. Also, quote-unquote negative attitude is a reporting option alongside with verbal harassment and griefing. Now, how do you gauge attitudes from a player who doesn't feed attentionally, doesn't play bad on purpose, doesn't grieve, or doesn't use any communication function but is perceived as negative by their teammates because they blame that person for losing the game? This happens often in a multi-premade team, where the mob of 3+ players blames the randoms for losing. Both of these report options were used just as a tool to potentially get back at teammates for quote-unquote ruining the game. Then we have quote-unquote refusing to communicate. This is another report option. Just think about that. Literally not participating in the chat and communication system that reads out your words and filters them through the player algorithm to detect toxicity. Not using these Orwellian chat functions can get you reported too. Also, what about players who are chat banned and literally cannot communicate? These categories make no sense and are only avenues for rampant abuse of the report function. Since this is based on an automated and now probably AI-assisted feature, it is likely prone to error, bias, and manipulation. Thus, League of Legends has developed a report abuse culture, using that tool to purposefully get back at people. Not because they are actually toxic, but because they slighted the reporting player in any way, shape or form. From taking farm, to picking the wrong champions, to banning the wrong champions, to just being blamed for losing the game. And with many automated systems, dogpiling through reports usually has an effect. And this is what players are banking on, even if nothing happens. Especially if it is a stack of 3 or more pre-made players reporting the one randomly match-made team member. The tribunal was eventually disabled in 2014, with Riot reflecting back on the system saying that it was sometimes wildly inaccurate, especially having a super innate bias due to the IP reward system on a successful penalty. No shit, Sherlock. The tribunal was not retired, by the way, because it failed or wasn't popular. Riot Games pivoted to a much easier and all-encompassing solution, that being the aforementioned algorithm-based and nowadays AI-assisted reporting and detection methods, making the tribunal expandable as a player reformation system, which, as already lined out, can easily be abused and does not solve the issue. And indeed, it does not replace human moderation, a sentiment we will see repeated the further we proceed to current day iterations of anti-toxicity systems. Riot Lyte in all of his attempts always left the player base to deal with his ramifications of his player behavior improvement systems. From the tribunal to the restrictions to the player reform cards, it all fell back into the hands of the community of League. Toxicity in games through Riot and Lyte transformed from meaning someone making a conscious effort to negatively affect the in-game experience to just someone being mean. By the way, does this count as another definition of toxicity? As I already mentioned, Riot Lyte did not just hold GDC speeches and ruin League. He also had many interviews with the gaming press, where he was, as well as his interviewers, pushing for some interesting expansion of his method to the wider online sphere. Why that is the case, and what he divulged in some of these interviews, will be shown to you right now.
What a fucking fat fucking bloated ass spawn enemy looking clown, if you know what the fuck I mean.
In an article by Kotaku, Riot Lyte is directly quoted in saying, "Players join League from a variety of different backgrounds. Everyone has a different culture, education, family background, gaming background, and more. We need systems to educate players that the aforementioned violations are not okay in League, and they'll improve their behaviors and make the community a better place." This was in an article around 2014. That article also claimed that very low actual action is being taken on players, or rather maybe the system did not in fact consider that their actions were as toxic at the time. Riot needs to figure out a way to emphasize positive events and minimize the poor experience. Quote-unquote "that's gay" is also being labeled as a reportable offense in the article, so you can see how low the barrier for reports is to some people. Would you instantly report a player if they said that in chat? I mean, at least it depends on the context in which it was stated. Also, Riot Lyte is being quoted again as saying, "We see about 2% of players in the tribunal refuse to reform regardless of consequences." If that number is even real and correct, that means that only 2% of toxic players actually never stop, and the rest do indeed get better, or stop being toxic altogether. Now, why then is toxicity still a growing issue? If these systems supposedly were effective, even back then in 2014, I will always ask yourself these questions when you read stuff like this. Also, what else might have happened in 2014 and 2015 that might have inspired gaming outlets especially to push for greater scrutiny and crackdowns on toxicity? What might have happened in, Gamergate. Great. In the wake of Gamergate, the toxicity topic in and around Riot Games got some more steam during that time, especially since Riot postured themselves as actively fighting against the sexist, homophobic, transphobic, racist male subculture in gaming. Mainstream media obviously picked up the GDC talk about toxicity and the news about Riot stamping out toxic players due to the entire industry being in crisis during Gamergate. It was a good segue to get back at those pesky male gamers, and a lot of them peddled the idea that Riot Games would be a forerunner, the spearhead to make the internet a better place. Notice anything about that wording? Not the game, not solo queuing, the internet, aka an all-encompassing war on online toxicity. It makes sense for the gaming press to push for mass censorship of that one specific online population that is likely the most critical of their shenanigans, those disgusting men. So yes, a lot of media attention around the time and even up to this day contributed and still contributes to this never-ending war on toxicity, whether it's in-game or not. One more reason why you don't hate game journalism enough. If you want more confirmation that games media has always used toxicity to push overall online censorship, here is another excerpt from The Verge shortly before the 2015 GDC talk. Of course, the problem of online abuse and harassment extends far beyond League. Similar problems can be found in other games, social networks, or pretty much anywhere else where people gather on the internet. So even though all of this work has made the League a better game overall, Lin believes that it could also help make the online world better as a whole. Quote, "We realized that if we really want to improve these online interactions, we have to go beyond League of Legends. We are not alone in this space." To that end, Riot has been meeting with other game developers, internet companies, and even schools to share data and best practices. Lin believes that in 5 years, every game developer working on a multiplayer title will have a team similar to this at Riot. Another quote from Lyte then goes like this: "Wouldn't it be cool if all of the other studios joined in and did these kinds of things? Then we have our next games and we'll already have positive communities." Keep that information in mind for later, because it turns out a lot of companies joined in on that trend, not just gaming companies. Hilariously, while the tribunal was down in 2014 after being shut down, reportedly player behavior was at its best at the time. So without the tribunal, the player behavior actually improved due to the other measures Riot implemented, aka the automated algorithm-based detections. According to this article in 2015, Lyte also claimed that toxic cases had fallen to only 2% and sourced one of the reasons to the tribunal contributing to Riot's algorithm-based detection system. That 2% number is attributed to the automated detection system, not the tribunal, which was shut down at this point. After all the time of Lyte psychoanalyzing the player base, publishing these findings to universities and schools, running social experiments on the community with all sorts of implemented player reformation, encouragement and punishment systems, after all those years, the resolution and the final number comes down to 2% in 2015. Do you have the impression that League is only 2% toxic nowadays? Isn't that an insane statement? Back in 2015, we were apparently down to only 2% toxicity. 2% is also apparently the evident number in 2015 that was used to justify and set up and invest and improve automated, algorithm-based and eventually AI-based detection system. Something is seriously wrong with that number. First of all, it's actually and realistically, statistically too low to anyone that played League. That should be evident. But how in the hell do numbers like this appear in reports like that and then go unchallenged? And then the counter-toxicity measures get ramped up due to only 2%. There is no world where this could be a justification. So you have to wonder why that number even was dropped in the first place. Since it's obviously way too low, this couldn't even have been used by any company to invest in more robust and improved anti-toxicity systems. But indeed, the articles at the time used that 2% to lay out how and why Riot now uses AI to monitor players online. So yes, this ridiculously low number was used to justify ever more intrusive player monitoring tools. That is insane. That should tell you it is absolutely not about decreasing just toxicity and reforming those 2% of players. It's definitely about something else. These companies just don't want to tell you about the ulterior motive as to why 2% of toxicity in millions of players is used as a statistic to set up even more increasingly draconian and fine-tuned AI player moderation. So where did Riot Lyte end up? Well, he was involved in a bunch of misconduct allegations in his relationships. As it turns out, the man who wants to fight all toxicity is an actually toxic control freak. Who would have guessed? He was accused of cheating on his fiancée with multiple women, and eventually that broke his career at Riot and his reputation publicly. However, you guessed it, just as with many other annoying personalities in the industry, he did not just vanish. Riot Lyte, or Jeffrey Lin, now works for Meta. Yes, his influence is now potentially spreading within one of the biggest social networks and also giant AI company. Riot Lyte always pushed for the spread of his methods. He and a lot of media outlets were pushing the need for the suppression of toxicity to reach further than just gaming. But this is naturally not where the war on toxicity in video games ends.
Beard looking like fucking carpet in an old ghetto apartment that roaches and just dirty ass popcorn kernels and shit then ran through.
Firstly, I need to disappoint you with another definition of toxicity from another study. This is from the Computers and Human Behavior Reports 19/2025. So it's a very recent source. Why yet another definition of toxicity? Have you not heard enough? Well, is to hammer home how badly understood the term still is. You would think Lyte's definition would become enshrined industry standard somehow, with the influence that Riot Games had within the sphere, but the fact that we are still trying to define the term in 2025 shows us we have still not reached a conscience on the matter. The study provides a multidimensional definition of toxicity. Toxicity is a collective term for acts that are perceived as disruptive by other players, that do not occur as a requirement of gameplay, that can take different forms of interaction, targets, intentions, and timing. So now we're missing the whole spreading aspect, which already, in my opinion, calls into question if this is an apt description. This study also makes the point to make clear that despite all efforts, toxicity is still a widespread issue in 2025. Weird, huh? What did Riot Games contribute? Is all of that just forgotten? To make matters worse, the literature sometimes refers to different and supposedly contradictory aspects in connection with toxicity. For example, the Fair Play Alliance describes toxicity as a term that is ambiguous and imprecise and encompasses very different aspects, such as conflicts caused by poor game design or matchmaking systems, intentionally inappropriate or abusive behavior by a player, or completely accidental misunderstandings without malice. The study also makes the statement that nevertheless, to this day, no single definition has been able to encompass when, how, where toxicity occurs, and what behaviors can be considered as toxic. That's interesting. I guess we forgot everything Riot and Riot Lyte contributed to the sciences. Also, all tools from automatic detection, reporting, muting, blocking, banning, all of these, in the eyes of the study, do not resolve the issue of toxicity. The study outlines the 4 dimensions of toxicity: forms of interactions, targets, intentions, and timing. Forms of interactions are toxic behavior as a mixture of primarily text-based behavioral toxicity and rarely voice-based toxicity. Interactions are offensive language, verbal abuse, deliberate feeding, and other harmful activities. The study considers this dimension of toxicity of low importance in shaping various definitions of toxicity. Then we have targets. Toxicity when directed towards teammates versus opponents. The study finds this dimension meaningful, yet its impact on differing definitions of toxicity remains relatively limited in the current body of research. Then we have intention. Toxicity as an exclusively externally directed intention. However, toxicity can also be understood as an internal attempt, for example, to cope with frustration and stress. Both are considered as an intention. These are short-term, non-systematic, negative behaviors that can be fueled by situational frustration, anger, or high levels of real-time competition, and that manifests in insults, criticism, resource hogging, and other actions. The study considers this dimension of high importance to the definition of toxicity. And lastly, there's timing. Toxicity as a proactive action as well as a reaction, often in the context of frustration, coping attempts during play. The study considers this definition to be crucial in finding an understanding and definition of toxicity. So that is the explanation of the multidimensional approach the study provided. And again, this is in 2025. The study also considers smurfing as a toxic action in addition to the usual negative behavior. Besides smurfing, the other actions are cyberbullying, cheating, doxing, trolling, spamming pings, raging, flaming, and leaving the game. Behavioral control is a negative predictor for the occurrence of toxicity, aka controlling a player's behavior before anything happens decreases toxic behaviors from occurring in the first place. So we are yet back at it again with the player behavior modification. I thought Riot Games figured this one out. Why are we still doing studies on this in 2025? The study aims to provide additional solutions and programs to be used to combat online game toxicity, such as educational programs instead of just automated systems. However, that's supposed to work out. For example, to reduce the reflexive actions of smurfing or cheating, other forms of intervention, such as educational programs, seem promising compared to more automatic, impulsive actions, such as the integration of a real-time traffic lights system during gameplay that directly affects behavior. In context of existing measures to combat toxicity, positive interventions and tools from sports psychology, especially real-time stress interventions, appear particularly promising. Such approaches could help not only to identify toxic behavior but also to counteract it preemptively by addressing stress as a central component of toxicity. The research paper also finds that studies on toxicity are way too focused on the MOBA genre instead of trying trying a more broad range approach. That shows a severe lack of knowledge and the lack of an available knowledge base in these areas, at least when talking about the sciences aspect of toxicity. And it also lays bare that a lot of types of toxicity, such as intentional feeding, slowing down of games, blocking progress, and other forms of hard to determine game sabotage, are not sufficiently considered when trying to define and combat toxicity. The study therefore shows that even in 2025, the term is still evolving. But what about other areas? What else happened within this space of gaming up until now? Well, we know that censorship is definitely ramping up, but not in a very effective way, such as chat censorship. For example, censoring historic words in a historic game. For example, the word Nazi was censored in Battlefield 5, which is set in World War II, which is at least a little bit weird. Or alternatively, while some words are censored, players can still find ways to offend players using the same words with different spelling or languages, as many LLM-based detection methods are trained on primarily the English language, as we will learn later on. The toxic gamer trope is also the most common kind of betrayal of culture in other platforms and media, and it is usually done in a humorous way. The toxic gamer is usually just seen as a gamer in popular media, and the article I'm about to show you, by the way, here is from the World Economic Forum, so feel free to think about that what you will, probably nothing positive. But about 60% of adult gamers believe that regulation is necessary to increase transparency around how companies address hate, harassment, and extremism. God help us if that is actually true. A focus on first detection at possibly the account creation level is considered, aka you make an account and then the AI bot deems the account name inappropriate and you are immediately barred and maybe even already banned from participating. Judging by other articles from this time, Gamergate to this day is still cited as the instigating event that brought toxicity in gaming culture to the forefront even years later. Now, I personally have found this to be completely untrue, and this fact is usually cited in articles of video game press, which is primarily and was primarily targeted by Gamergate, so it does make sense that those journalists would not look favorably onto Gamergate. In this case, I would argue it's being incorrectly used as a scapegoat. Gamergate was not a toxicity event and did not bring gaming toxicity to the forefront within the genre. We then have yet another definition of toxicity in esports now within this study. Quote, toxicity as used colloquially in esports and video gaming context broadly refers to various types of negative behaviors involving abusive communications directed towards other players and disruptive behaviors that violate the rules and social norms of the game. Toxic communications can include harassment, verbal abuse, hate speech, flaming, and raging. Toxic behaviors include spamming communications and griefing. Some researchers and players also include cheating under the umbrella of toxicity. Toxic behaviors can extend well beyond the esports context, threatening the safety of players through doxing and swatting. Since this study, by the way, adds cheating to the list of toxic behavior, what about using Adderall and other performative enhancements in esports? Think about it. That seems pretty toxic to me. Maybe shouldn't be allowed. Just a thought. The study also cites a negative impact on stakeholders. Now this is the important part. Toxicity can negatively affect public opinion, raising barriers to entry, decreasing founders' potential willingness to invest, and harming perceived legitimacy. Yep, this is one of the most important aspects of combating toxicity, the impact and brand risk. Toxicity can directly affect the revenue of game developers and publishers, as it can lead players to quit games. It leads to fewer players spending money in-game and on subscriptions, expansions, and sequels. Oh no! Sponsors may be less willing to invest in esports titles because they do not want to be associated with toxicity. Governing bodies may impose more regulations. That's not a joke, by the way. The ESRB is calling for an additional inclusion of a community toxicity rating in the ESRB score. Then we have Faceit, a platform for competitive gaming, an online platform and a client. It reports successful use of AI-based tools for text, dialogue, and behavioral toxicity moderation. AI-based automatic filtering boils down to basically auto-muting and text filtering, aka typing GG easy is being filtered to something else, like the example would be in Overwatch. The article considers false positive detections as a negative, which is good, and considers that automatic tools might be seen as censoring and interruption, harming experience and trust in the platforms. Hey, at least there's some introspection tracking happening. There's also obvious privacy concerns, as no company fully discloses how deeply and thoroughly the AI tools scan interactions in-game and in chat, and how long the data is kept. Keep in mind that some games have private whisperer and out-of-match communication functions that likely are also monitored by these AI tools. Also, let's be honest here, the auto-mute function is effectively shadow banning. Just felt like pointing that out here. Avoid player features are also considered solutions to toxicity, but again, these tools can be misused to avoid players that have just played badly or were perceived as a burden to the team. There are also considerations on how to tackle the alt account creation to prevent toxic players from just making new accounts after permanent bans. No broad solutions have officially been listed in guidebooks so far, but we will soon hear about one specific idea, and it's a very terrible one. Support tools for players targeted by toxicity are considered in order for them to cope with the situation. No concrete systems or approaches exist as of now, so I don't know what that's supposed to entail. Maybe you can go to a psychiatrist after being insulted in a game or something, have like a hack box, go to therapy, I don't know. Then there are calls for legal frameworks for dealing with toxicity. These are also considered in gaming. And this is where it gets really dicey, as it drifts into general online behavior and melds both game toxicity with online hate speech. Regulation for harmful behaviors, potentially from government through law, are considered. And this is exactly what all of this is used to push for. It's just one of the many avenues for certain groups to push for legal consequences for saying mean things online. And as we've already seen, what is and isn't considered toxic is a very broad spectrum. The same thing with hate speech. Pushing for actual government regulation feels like this is the end goal of some of these organizations. In addition, it's considered to include toxicity in the code of conduct of games, which most players never read. Therefore, even the article kind of throws this idea out of the window pretty quickly. Also, I'm pretty sure some games already have rules about toxic behavior in their code of conduct, or at least I'm pretty sure about that. Changing culture and norms is another one of these real end goals of the war on toxicity. Changing human behavior through diversity and inclusion in gaming with initiatives such as the Good Luck Have Fun pledge. Just wait until Good Luck Have Fun is also considered toxic, by the way. What are these organizations going to do then? I mean, they're just going to rename themselves, as always. Then we have competitions such as the ESL Impact and the Valorant Games Changers that are dedicated for women only and other marginalized genders. Then toxicity was also apparently cited as being responsible for 30% of player churn. Now, where does that number come from? The article doesn't really state it. How is that number evaluated? What makes up that 30% of player churn? No idea. No further information given in the article. And to make things even worse, one solution to making new accounts after permanent bans was to add, drumroll, user verification, which encourages all users to verify their account with an ID, such as a passport or national identity card. This is apparently already active within the Faceit client and the website. You now gotta show your ID to make sure you won't be toxic, and if we ban you, we got your personal data, so you will never be able to make a new account with these credentials. Well, unless you faked your ID, then this is also circumvented, but we do hope the sheeps just will hand out their IDs over to us. Also, apparently, this ID process has been quote-unquote very well received by the community. I'm sure it was very well received. So with the push for ID verification being everywhere nowadays, we will for sure see this one creep into multiplayer games as well to hold quote-unquote bad actors accountable. So we have a more focused, scientifically informed and emboldened approach to combating toxicity. We have all the tools, the reasons and the motivations. But what do the actual reports say about the current state of toxicity?
I'm standing in a whole crowd. I can see over an ocean full of manlets.
This report is from 2023 and had 2,522 participants. The findings are that toxicity is at high levels. FPSs are 51% toxic, racing titles are 49% toxic, and Battle Royale games are at 44% toxicity. Almost all consumers surveyed have changed their behavior due to toxic players. 53% of devs say toxic behavior has worsened in past years. 76% of players avoid games known for their harmful communities. Also, here are the 2023 graphs on how players dealt with toxicity in games. Yeah, it doesn't look too good now, does it? Then there is 2025. We have 2,000 gamers from the United States that were surveyed here. 77% of players have experienced harassment while gaming online. 52% of women say they have stopped playing games due to harassment or a toxic community. 85% believe platforms should actively moderate hate symbols, slurs and explicit content. 84% of respondents would not let a child under 13 play online multiplayer games. What a weird question to ask. 58% of players mute or block toxic users and nearly 30% avoid certain platforms altogether. This is how players reacted to toxicity in 2025. Almost 60% mute or block toxic players. 29% actively avoid certain communities or platforms. 28% quit game sessions or matches mid-game due to harassment, which shouldn't that be a toxic behavior themselves? Then 27% stopped using voice or chat altogether. 12% completely stopped playing certain games. Now, for some reason, this article also asked the participants if they would allow a below 13-year-old to participate in online games, and then they were surprised that most said no. I mean, no one in their right mind should expose a child under the age of 13 to online games or to the internet even, but that's another topic. And 85% of respondents believe gaming platforms should actively moderate offensive content. 56% of the participants even want proactive moderation, meaning automatic and without prior reporting. Keep in mind that this is 2025, where moderation on most platforms is already present and LLMs are now involved in the process. And still, it's not enough to curb toxicity. In fact, it notably seems to get worse the more attempts to stamp out toxicities are made. Someone should maybe make a study on that phenomena. And to prove the industry interest in the issue, the article cites this. 20% of gamers, teens and adults, have reduced their spending on a game because of in-game harassment. Now, I think it's time to show you the final form of the war on toxicity now.
Seeing a rage quit live? Did you see your band live too?
In a PC Games article from 2018, there was a mention of an alliance made up by 30 companies: Blizzard, Riot, CCP, Twitch, Discord and Epic, etc. It was called the Fair Play Alliance, a word you will hear quite often if you read articles on toxicity, and even studies cite this initiative. And the article had a handy link to their website. This is the original URL, however this now just leads to another site. It's now called Thriving in Games. This site is still active and hosting seminars as late as November 2025. It also has interesting articles such as this: Safety by Design as a Gameplay Practice. Designing gameplay that is engaging, inclusive, fun and immersive is challenging for any development team. Designing gameplay where players inherently feel safe and welcome to express themselves without fear of abuse, harassment or worse is even harder. This was written in August 2019-2025 and, as expected, like all articles, suggests toxicity is still on the rise. This article also is a guidebook that aims at specifically younger players, and it speaks out about brand trust, a very important term to this organization. The article then lists the 4 risks when implementing the Safety by Design solution: potential for user-generated content, social or multiplayer features, the possibility for exploitation, and regulatory obligations. It mentions pro-social behavior here, another interesting term. In game design, pro-social behavior refers to actions that benefit others, intentionally or unintentionally. Pro-social behavior is what fuels healthy, lasting communities and makes successful teams work. The success of multiplayer games and their communities depends on players exhibiting pro-social behavior. Pro-socially is generally defined as actions that are intended to benefit others. These actions can take many forms, such as assisting, cooperating, following rules, gifting, shaking hands after a game, sharing, volunteering, and there's a handy checklist available if you want to see more. Almost universally, pro-social behavior is defined as something a person does intentionally or altruistically. However, this article suggests through developer game design, even unintentionally, these actions can be induced. And then we also read sentences like this: though game companies don't exist to improve societies by fostering communities driven by pro-social behavior, they can help make societies a bit better. The article then also states, consider applying the principles of rewarding before rewards. Make pro-social actions satisfying and meaningful to do on their own. Reserve extrinsic rewards for achieving longer-term goals. Consider player archetypes, especially those who generally don't have healthy intrinsic motivations when creating extrinsic rewards. Look for ways to combine selfish intent with pro-social intent, which will generate greater social reward. This reads and looks a lot like social conditioning to me. This article also labels civility as quote-unquote a deeply problematic term, and it makes this comparison. For example, it can be harmful to ask a person with a marginalized identity to be civil to someone in a position of privilege. Thus, civility really points us toward equality rather than equity. By proactively designing for pro-social behavior, you're more likely to see politeness and respect, characteristics of civility. Then there's a little list of good and bad signs of the pro-social experiments on players as shown here. Pause if you want to read. Judging by that graph, a lot of companies are failing at encouraging pro-social behavior, especially at the community level. The Safety by Design handbook lists a few further legally required risk management, such as combating sexually inappropriate behavior and hate speech, even in gaming. And then there are links to actual design methods to achieve the goal. Presumably, this is what developers would follow when designing a game. In addition, there are even more articles on pro-social behavior. The specific handbook, by the way, a handbook guide for shorter session-based games, it considers League's honor system as an appropriate method to prompt and encourage pro-social behavior in players. And we all know how that one worked out. Also, there's a point made about attribution and misattribution. Other players sometimes get credit for contributing to a success without doing anything. This is called misattribution, and for the purpose of social satisfaction is an acceptable, if not desirable, outcome. This website is a never-ending source of guidebooks, handbooks, tools, video speeches, interviews, articles, all based around combating online toxicity, mostly through gaming, but also extrapolating it to the wider online space. Most of them describe tactics to psychologically nudge a player's behavior in a certain way, mostly involuntarily and subconsciously. You can likely read there for days on this website alone. The link tree never stops, it never ends. So, how influential is this group? They get basically no views on their YouTube videos, and I don't know how many unique viewers the site that does get. Well, let me show you who is on the official list of supporters for this endeavor. We got Tencent, Riot Games, Twitch, Amazon, 505 Games, Blizzard, Discord, EA, Facebook, Epic Games, Intel, Ubisoft, and Roblox. Very ironic that Roblox is on the list of the supporters of a company that specifically targets younger players in games. Very ironic that Roblox is on that list. And then there are many more. So suffice to say, there's a lot of industry interest and support behind this site, if not even funding. And there's a huge industry behind combating gaming toxicity in general, or maybe even toxicity on the internet as a whole. In fact, there are large corporate interests in defeating online toxicity. We saw a lot of mixing of in-game and online toxicities in these guidelines and tools built by gaming companies, and they're absolutely going to be incorporated or used as templates to combat hate speech on the wider internet, because that is specifically what they are designed to do. So now let's talk about a little bit about toxicity on social media.
Come see me IRL. Just that simple.
Now, I had a whole additional point about the war on toxicity on social media networks with a bunch of studies, but honestly I had to cut it down to the time concerns. This video is bloated as it is, and I already had to cut a lot out of the video. I would just urge you to read some of the studies and articles yourself. To keep it short, social media aspect is almost identical to the in-game aspect and the war of toxicity. There are just a few more considerations. Section 230 is naturally of high importance to this issue. It shields platforms from liability for user-generated content while allowing them to moderate their spaces without becoming an official publisher. The effects of toxicity are still not fully understood on social media, so just as we saw previously, there are probably like 20 different definitions on toxicity within that space too. Some studies I read do actually suggest there is very low demand for content moderation on social media. Other studies say the complete opposite. In addition, some advanced forms of incivility, aka toxicity, are seen as an essential element for democratic emancipation and the pursuit of justice, so they should exist. Democrats are almost twice as likely to demand moderations than Republicans. Democrats are also on average more sensitive to toxic content. That's not surprising news to anyone, I'm pretty sure. Toxicity is, as expected, a more left-wing oriented issue. In America, specifically, the strong belief in the value of freedom of speech is driving the resistance against more robust content moderation systems, and thank God for that. And even progressive voices have expressed concerns about the suppression of marginalized voices and the potential for content moderation to silence important critiques of social power structures. There seems to be more support for posting false information than generally toxic online behavior, which is a wild finding. Toxic speech is also often misconstrued with hate speech, even within these studies, and I think this is also very much on purpose. On the one hand, only 20% agree that uncivil behavior is common in disagreements, but also 64% think that rudeness is sometimes needed on social media, and 65% think that if you share your views on social media, you must be ready for aggressive replies from those who disagree. While in gaming, race and sexuality are more often primary targets for toxic abuse, in the social media world, expressing political views is a more common reason for online abuse. The US is a global outlier in the demand for content moderation. In general, most non-US social media users yearn for more robust content moderation. US social media users want a more hands-off, minimalist approach with a big spotlight on preservation of freedom of speech, while other countries would rather see a more harm prevention oriented approach with a balance between moderation and free speech. You know, whatever that means. So in the end, thank God, most of these companies reside in the US, and most of the US citizens still hold freedom of speech in such high regard. Also, if you wanted to know, I counted at least 7 or 8 different definitions of toxicity up until now, but I'm also slowly losing my mind going through the script, so let's just bring this to an end.
I'm telling you, don't try me IRL. I'm just warning you. I've been waiting.
Even though we heard many strong and decisive definitions, it is very clear and intentional that toxicity as a term was very excessively muddied over the years, to the point where you might argue that the term toxicity is almost non-quantifiable anymore. You can't get a straight definition of the term anymore. It's a descriptor that can be made to fit any negative action behavior, as basically anything a person might not like can be defined as toxic, to the point where parts of the word spread to outside of gaming to other avenues of life to describe the same vague negativity and potentially unwanted behavior. And it's naturally all fully dependent on who and why the definition gets thrown around at the time of that declaration being made. Who calls someone toxic? Why do they call it toxic? And what is the impact and maybe even the benefit to labeling something toxic? Swearing, shit-talking, psychological pre-game warfare, even just critique is labeled as toxic. Game balancing is toxic, going AFK is toxic. The absolute vast majority of insults usually come down to casual cursing, the most generic thing you've probably heard as a kid on the schoolyard and maybe even used yourself all throughout your life. It's usually an expletive thrown out in an affective state of anger over a shitty game. Very rarely get players actually creative and twisted with their shit talking and flaming, and why would they? In about 90% they will never see any of these players again. Let's be honest, most people get heated in the moment, then move on and let go. Rarely do people stay mad throughout an entire session, and even more rarely do they take that negativity outside of the game long after the session has ended. Just don't keep it in and let it eat at you. If you cannot hang in a public chat environment, you can mute and block. I disagree that an entire community needs to bow down to the sensibilities of a few people. Instead, those people unfortunately need to remove themselves from that community aspect. If you head out to a loud and rowdy pub and then ask everyone to be quiet since you personally don't like their noise, you will be asked to leave the pub. Block, ignore and mute. In the worst cases, report. So we just need a good and solid reporting system to get the worst offenders. In general, we need to ease off with the censorship. It doesn't have any effect, especially if you are an adult. You should not get baited into a mud-flinging match with a 13-year-old. If you get upset at a child, you are the issue. If generic schoolyard insults genuinely upset you, there's something wrong with you. Offense is never given, it is always taken. Don't expect to not be chewed out over messing up in a football game. What is this weird tendency to make all online spaces clean and boring? That is not how the real world works. Tough talk is needed sometimes. Rudeness is needed sometimes. And if you don't like it, don't interact with it. Or set up your own space with your own rules. I personally abstain from certain communities, games or activities exactly because I don't want to be part of a mud-flinging match. I never use in-game chat functions, nor do I activate the in-game voice chat. You can make your own safe space environment pretty effectively already. I would never demand other community members bow down to my sensibilities. I just don't want to talk to anyone when I game, and if I do, I join a Discord group or rather hang out with my buddies in our private Discord. I am strictly against ever more invasive methods of that nebulous war on toxicity, as it's not going to benefit any of us in the long run. I am fully in support of minimalist, freedom of speech oriented, hands-off approaches to content moderation. I don't believe in deleting any comments or discourse on public platforms unless it is not strictly and actually breaking the law. Oh, and by the way, hate speech is free speech. But this pervasive, ever-evolving idea of toxicity reached other gaming community sectors a long time ago, such as forums and fan sites, Reddit and Twitter. It has fully engulfed these spaces and affected some of the language there even. We have toxic balancing, toxic plays, toxic champion design, toxic positivity, toxic community management, toxic moderation, toxic shoutcasting, toxic player organizations, toxic event management, toxic incentives, toxic crowds, toxic game development, toxic studio climates, toxic gamer culture, toxic masculinity, toxic reviews, toxic review bombing, and so on and so forth. The way toxicity is used as a buzzword to intentionally or unintentionally describe a broad range of behavior and actively push the development of that word to be all-encompassing within a community sphere, it just reeks of cultish tendencies, especially since once that word becomes unquestionably law, it shuts down healthy thoughts and opposition. In short, it suppresses critical thinking within a subset of the community, which is exactly the purpose of a buzzword. It is a knockout argument to shut up criticism. Toxicity is just a scapegoat to assert overall control over the player base and suppress any form of unwanted behavior. It is just an argument for censorship. And of course, player behavior will never be positive enough to ease up on the social engineering and surveillance. It is never really just about improving player behavior. It is about asserting power and influence and guiding as well as artificially engineering the desired player or human behavior by mental conditioning and enforced self-censorship. The more you silence and browbeat your players, the more likely it is they offer less negative pushback on other aspects. You breed willing, empty-headed, sheep-like yes-man followers, or at least that is one of the ulterior motives behind the ever-expanding war on toxicity. It is not very effective, as we can see even today. In fact, the overzealous censorship might have created a much more in tune and critical player base, very acutely aware of the shenanigans that studios try to play on them. Oh, and also, and this is the most important part, I don't believe any of these tools had any effect on the human nature of people, no matter how hard all of these organizations try. And I know just the right kind of toxicity expert to close out the video with the simple, basic truth of the matter. Take it away, Mr. Shaklon.
You cannot force change upon people. Okay? As much as you claim to be different for other reasons, or having changed for other reasons, it is not the case till full conviction, okay? As long as you're not fully convinced about the reasons that lead to you changing, it doesn't happen. And you can especially not force that on someone to change for your own benefit. You can't do that. It's not possible, and it's morally it's not a good thing to do.
People couldn't understand us now. The things we did, why we did them. Because the reasons were hidden away in those 9 years of growing up in an angry world. If you step into his world with his mind,